This isn't the first latency guide I've done, so if you want to see the other games I've tested, or find out more about what it is I'm testing and the wider factors you might want to consider, I'll leave the playlist in the cards above. Warzone 3 is a bit of a return to form, with the worst results being near on 3 times slower than the best. So, unlike in VALORANT, it's a lot more important to run with the right settings. Luckily, I spent 2 whole days painstakingly collecting data on live servers for the most accurate data possible, and have a collection of results to run you through. If you enjoy these videos, by the way, let me know by hitting the like button. So, starting with the high end, if you happen to want visual quality out of a COD game for some insane reason, we've got the extreme presets with no DLSS or NVIDIA Reflex, but the same again, but also with path tracing. Much to my surprise, path tracing really doesn't add much or really does anything to the results. It's ever so slightly slower on average, sure, but considering most standard ray tracing type features murder performance, well, seeing as this feature, which is basically just DLSS ray reconstruction, doesn't hurt performance almost at all, is mighty impressive. In fact, looking at the FPS results, you can see a frankly minuscule difference, just 1 FPS on average between them. Naturally, you'd likely want a bit more performance though, as 75 FPS isn't all that much, especially in COD, so let's add in DLSS to see how that does. Unsurprisingly, that bumps the performance up considerably, going from around 75 FPS average to 109 FPS average, and raising the 1% lows to well above even the average performance without DLSS. On the latency front, that bump in performance alone makes for a significant improvement, dropping from around 50 milliseconds to just 31 milliseconds. That's an incredibly significant jump, and it's clearly well worth enabling DLSS here, both for outright performance and for latency. Finally, at least on the extreme preset runs, let's enable NVIDIA Reflex, a tool that is specifically designed to help lower the input latency. Somewhat unsurprisingly, it does help, only by 0.7 milliseconds on average. It's also a touch more unstable, with a slightly higher maximum and slightly lower minimum. Still, an improvement is always good. Now let's move down a preset to Ultra, with DLSS and Reflex enabled, but with path tracing disabled. Surprisingly, that's about the same as Extreme with DLSS and path tracing. Clearly, there isn't much of a difference between those two presets, so let's skip down again to Balanced. Finally, we see a reasonable improvement, over 4 milliseconds faster, no less. Performance-wise, we can see why, as Balanced offers 117.5 FPS average, up from the best so far of 109. Interestingly, that's actually only about 0.7 milliseconds faster per frame on average, so there's clearly some pipeline optimizations between the two modes that allows for the other 3 milliseconds or so of latency improvement. I want to jump down to the minimum preset, as generally that's where you'll find the best performance, and so we can try out some of the other myriad of options that are available here. Minimum on its own delivered fantastic performance, dropping another 2 milliseconds off the total, bringing us down to 25.9 milliseconds on average. It also delivered the best outright performance at 128.6 FPS on average, although again that's only 0.8 milliseconds of frame time faster than the Balanced results, despite the 2 millisecond drop in latency. Anyway, I thought it'd be interesting to see how FSR handles things, especially in other games that I tested like Rainbow Six Siege. FSR offered significantly lower latency than DLSS. Warzone was actually updated overnight during my testing to swap FSR 2.1 to FSR 3.0, so I've got FSR 3 data here. Surprisingly, FSR3 seems to slow things down, both in latency at 28.7 milliseconds, up from 25.9 with DLSS, and in frame rate, dropping to just 111 FPS on average, down from 128.6 with DLSS on. That's quite surprising, considering the results that I've seen in other games on the same RTX 4060 laptop-based machine, no less. Okay, so if FSR doesn't help, what does DLSS frame generation do? In theory, frame generation adds in fake frames to help smooth out your experience. This should bump up the frame rates, although it's likely to add a decent amount of latency, as the fake frame has to look at the current frame and the next real frame to be able to generate that intermediary fake one, then display the current and fake frames before finally displaying that new real one. And yeah, looking at the latency, that's dreadful. The average shoots up to 48.4 milliseconds, or nearly as bad as running at 75 FPS on extreme. The thing that surprised me the most, though, was with the frame rate data. With FrameGen enabled, I expected considerably higher frame rates, possibly double, but what I got was 125 FPS average. That's slower than without FrameGen enabled. I'm at a complete loss as to what's happening here, so if you have any ideas, please do leave them in the comments. I did check things like the FPS cap, all that sort of stuff, VSync, all of that was off or set to unlimited. But anyway, also just because COD does let you do this, here's what FSR 3.0 plus FrameGen looks like. Yeah, it's really bad. It's actually the worst result by 11 milliseconds. It's over 10 milliseconds slower than DLSS and FrameGen, possibly unsurprisingly. The FPS data also shows that FrameGen with FSR was only 1 FPS faster than without it on too, which again just leaves me very confused. Anyway, the final results I want to show you is actually a higher preset than minimum, called Basic. Surprisingly, on my hardware, in this specific test pattern I was doing, it was the fastest result that I got, and by a reasonable margin. It averaged 22.9 milliseconds, which is 3 milliseconds faster than minimum with DLSS and reflex enabled. Interestingly, the FPS data I captured at the same time shows Basic wasn't even the fastest frame rate. It's a close match to minimum, but it's 5 FPS slower than that minimum preset. So, if you want the best performance, at least on an NVIDIA-based system, it seems that DLSS is your best bet. Both minimum and basic presets provide great results, both in frame rates and latency, but for the love of God, don't use FrameGen. It's interesting to see how COD is markedly slower than games like Siege. Even the fastest results that I got from COD only just about surpasses the worst results I got in Siege. The best result I got in Siege was 9.7 milliseconds, which is well under half the best result I got in COD. Maybe on a different system you can eke out better results, but at least on my machine, that doesn't seem to be the case. Anyway, that's a look at COD Modern Warfare 3 and Warzone 3. Let me know what other games you want to see me test in future videos in the comments down below, and if you're interested in testing or being able to test this sort of stuff on your own system, you can head to osrtt.com and buy one of my latency tools, the open source latency testing tools that I make myself literally at my desk downstairs, so properly made in the UK and all, at osrtt.com if you're interested. Of course, if you just want to stay up to date with these videos, of course you can check out the playlist if you haven't seen the rest of them, hit the subscribe button, and check out plenty of other videos on the end cards when they pop up in a second. You can also support the channel through the links in the description, through Amazon, Overclock's UK links, all in the description, and a load of other stuff. Feel free to have a look. And otherwise, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, I'll see you on the next video.